Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlight Series. Today we will be looking at Benchmark 1.6, in which we will analyze the ideas and grievances set forth in the Declaration of Independence. In Part 3, we focus on the colonial grievances identified in the Declaration of Independence. For this particular benchmark clarification, we're going to recognize colonial grievances that would include imposing taxes without the consent of the people, suspending trial by jury, limiting judicial powers, quartering soldiers, and dissolving legislatures. The colonial grievances included in the Declaration of Independence are listed on the left. What you see on the left are specific excerpts from the document. On the right side, we see what those excerpts mean. So let's look at the first excerpt, the grievance, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. What does it mean to impose taxes on someone without our consent? After all, if someone's going to tax you, that means that they're taking money from you that is yours, that you earned, or that was given to you, but it's your money. And they're taking a part of it or a percentage of it and saying, I'm taking this portion so that I can run the government. So naturally, people are not very much inclined to consent to somebody taking money from them. So when we think about the concept of consent, it's really about, did the people have a part in the decision making that resulted in the taxation, such as representation in the legislature? And so when we're talking about imposing taxes on us without our consent, what we really mean is that the king taxed colonists without the colonists consenting to or having a voice in that process. And by not having a voice, that meant that they believed that the taxes that were imposed upon them were unfair. Let's look at our next excerpt, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury. What this means is that the king denied those accused of crimes the right to a trial with a jury of their peers. The right to a trial with a jury of one's peers is an idea that in order to determine whether or not someone is guilty, a group of people who are from the community where the crime took place look at the evidence and they together make a decision on whether or not the person committed the crime or did not commit the crime. This concept means that the people who are looking at the person's actions and hearing evidence about the person's actions know what the law is and then can determine whether or not those actions were done, were undertaken. But they can also determine if the person who was accused of the crime actually is the one who did those actions. So a jury has a lot of responsibility, but this concept comes from the idea that the jury should be from one's peers, and that jury knows the law, they know what was done, and they make a determination whether or not the law was broken, and if the law was broken by the person who was accused of that crime. So the colonists were saying that the king deprived them of this fundamental right. Next excerpt. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. When we think about somebody in the judiciary branch or who has a judicial role, if they are judging, we expect that justice will be blind, that a judge will not be swayed in some way to make a judgment or to make a decision that has anything to do with factors outside that particular case. In many respects, that's why justices wear black robes. The idea is that their own viewpoints and opinions are not a factor. So everyone wears the same black robe to show that their only interest is what's going on in a particular case and whether or not a law was applied fairly and appropriately, whether or not a law was broken, etc. So for the king to make judges dependent on what he wanted for the tenure of their offices, meaning whether or not they stayed in office and whether or not they got paid, that the judges were expected to abide by the king's will and to not be objective in how they viewed cases if those people wanted to keep their jobs and if those people wanted to be paid for doing their jobs. Next, he is kept among us in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislature. What this means is that people were forced to house military personnel without the colonial legislatures weighing in, without the colonial legislatures having a say in whether or not the British government could require that they house military personnel. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the right of the people. What this means is that the king, if the legislature was doing something that the king didn't like, the king just got rid of the legislature. And what the colonists were saying is that by not having that legislature, by not having people who were elected to represent the point of view of those who lived near them, that they were elected to serve, that meant that the king did not want to hear any disagreement. And because the king did not want to hear any disagreement, the king just dissolved the legislature and then deprived the people any kind of a voice or representation in government. Thus, the king denied the legislature the right to make laws that the king disagreed with. Thank you so much for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? Please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.